knock on my door. I guess Stu's not waiting for me. God, you didn't watch Three's Company?
No.
Oh, I forgot. You guys were watching Channel 4.
We didn't need to import all that nonsense. We had our own far superior television
Channel
shows.
4.
Yeah, I used to watch Eurotrash. Welcome to Eurotrash.
The place where we discuss all things Stu, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, a.k.a. Uber Bear, joined by Stu, who apparently thinks Ricky Gervais is the greatest actor of all time and comedian, and Channel 4 rules. What you got?
I think Ricky Gervais is pretty funny. I think that's a heck of a stretch.
I think it's
greatest
pretty
comedian.
funny. I think he's really funny.
I think he's funny.
Life's Too Short. Did you ever watch that with Work Davis? Oh my God.
Yes, I've watched that show. It's very funny.
So that's not what we're here to talk about. May, what are we going to talk about?
We should talk about
Did anybody read our notes? Anybody read our show notes? This is a Saturday.
I did read the show notes.
Look
and
at
we're here
there.
to talk about magic cards in cubes. No, I'm totally kidding. So you highlighted a card in particular that you added to your cube, and even though you said that you weren't going to add this part, I'm going to add it anyways. Stu told you that this card bad.
Yeah.
So we were trying to figure out what kind of lines exist within your cube and trying to figure out the replacement, and I think that it can open a greater conversation for finding out whether or not that the glue cards that you thought that you were trying to include was actually solving an issue, or if it's just, hey, this is a neat tool that I want to play around with.
She got it right. Points of intersection. That's what we're looking at. Like card evaluation in terms of this again for the second time. You know, we just did the Ode to Felden. This is not through intent. It just happens to be that, you know, our group has multiple cubes going to KubeCon 2025. And I'm staring at them through a microscope to a degree with a couple of cards that I know either haven't performed or just aren't really living up to my expectations and what my design goals are. And when I'm looking at, in this case, Uber Bear's artifact cube, a cube that has existed for a long time, and I was referencing May in the kind of the, you know, prelude we were having before we fired up the mics and Stu, there's a point in every curator's life where your project kind of becomes pseudo-stable. Like, other than just doing a couple of revisions, small updates, sometimes, you know, after years and years of churning and updates and kind of getting your cube where it fits the meta of your playgroup, it can hit like a point that feels very stable.
Can I say it almost feels like that sounds like a little bit of a contradiction.
It is.
And I'll explain my logic, right? So you've said in numerous times that your artifact cube is your favorite cube, that you feel it's the most technical cube. Every card is most certainly in there for a very good reason. There's no filler. And I kind of feel like saying that minor changes. Are there any minor changes?
It doesn't feel minor anymore.
Nothing can be minor.
It can be borderline stressful. Like, remove the kill the darlings aspect. Remove this is a staple. Remove feedback and all the things that we kind of deal with. But lean more into the idea that my cube feels right. Things are playing well. And this could be for any curator, the Fey cube or whatnot, right? Sandwich's peasant cube. And changing a card can be a lot more painful. It's not an emotional attachment. It's more like a structural component or a pillar of a cube where, sure, not a single card will hold up an entire cube, but it could cause an imbalance. And you can get into your own headspace. Do you agree with that, May? What I mean is you can think that the shift can happen.
So I get what you're saying. I feel that a large part of that conflict as curators that we experience has to do with we notice changes along a greater period of time than our players do, because our players are only thinking about like how their decks performed within that time, whether or not they can repeat that deck. They're thinking about kind of how they're trying to address the cube. They're not really thinking about like the overarching cube design, right? And that's not something that we're going to ask or expect of them. Because simply put, they're not tracking that information. They're not keeping track of like how the different metas have developed within our cube spaces and whatnot. But that also just comes with the experience of, you know, having an established cube and recognizing the patterns because we've had enough time to establish and look at those patterns, right? So I have a couple notes that I wanted to add in order to kind of prompt the discussion around this.
Can I put a pin in that for the excitement of the listeners and we have our drinks real quick?
Fine, I suppose we can have our drinks.
May, what are you having?
I am sipping some box wine from Costco, some Cabernet.
Uh-oh. We're not the heathens now. Look at this, dude. Woo! Loot!
Well done.
I'm having coffee.
I'm also having coffee.
Oh, my God. May, we need to talk about May's wine problem. I'm just going to do it. I'm just kidding. But, May, what do you got here?
Look, we flipped the script for once.
You did,
Usually
you did.
It's the other way around.
Let's do it our not like, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Drinking the teas or the coffees or the whatnot. And no. This time I'm being the rampant alcoholic. Anyways.
So you had some points that the listeners are just totally just drumming their fingers right now on the table going, where's May's points?
So, point first. Have you heard the full expression for jack of all trades?
Yes.
Master of none.
I am a master of none. And
so
puppets.
The full expression for that is there's a jack of all trades who is a master of none, but oftentimes is better than a master of one. That secondary part gets cut out a lot because there's this weird idea around needing to focus things around being specialized and whatnot. In the context of Cube, we like glue cards. We like cards that can fulfill a lot of roles because they end up drafted in a lot more decks. However, there also comes with the opposite end of that spectrum where it's like, this card is so hyper-specialized. So let's take the Fake Cube, for example, right? Where we have, say, a lot of these typal payoffs. And we have things like Imperious Prefect, right? Where Imperious Prefect makes the things that it supports. It's a perfectly functional card on its own, as opposed to some other elf lord who doesn't make the elves, right? The problem with those types of cards is that only the elf deck is going to want that, as opposed to Imperious Prefect that can end up in all kinds of different decks. Even though it's clearly an elf card, it can end up in a lot of spaces, and that has to do with the kind of specialization, right? Now, when we're talking about a generic glue card and the way that we are trying to approach solving this kind of bridging these archetypes and creating things that are draftable, I think it's also important that we give credit where credit is due, where people do not want to draft bad cards just because they work within their archetypes, right? So this was actually something that I experienced a few times, and it can come up quite often in conversations where it's just like, oh, on paper, this is a card that fundamentally can fit into a lot of different decks. But which of these, say, 15 or so odd decks are actually actively wanting to draft this card and run it in the main board, right? How many of those decks are looking for this card? Not saying like as a first kick, or like, I'm thinking more somewhere in the middle of the pack, where it's somewhere like 7th, maybe 8th pick, where it's just like, oh, I'm looking to fill out my slots at that point. Once you start noticing a pattern of those glue cards getting passed around, that's maybe when we want to have these conversations. So my question for you, to give you that segue, is that, one, is you should talk about what this card actually is, and 2, do you feel like that this glue card is something that people actively want to draft because it's filling a slot, or they're wanting to draft because it's the 15th pick?
So I think there's an important point that we should distinguish here. And I want to, before we even start tearing into this kind of idea.
This card sucks.
Besides this card sucks, I want to talk about the differentiation between a card that is generic and a card that is generically placed because it has multiple points of intersection. Like, I want to take a difference between a role player, say like you said, Imperious Perfect, versus Counterspell. Whereas Counterspell is a staple that gets passed around the table, and some people, I mean, it's a lot more generic and such that it can fit in most any deck that'll double down on blue. And we can use we can do Preordain, we can do Lightning Bolt, we can do whatever you want. Those are generic in the sense that anything would want them. Skull Clamp, they'll get played. Their versatility is just going on the table, and they'll get scooped up. Whereas a role-playing card that's also pseudo-generic but has, let's say, 4 points of intersection on multiple decks or archetypes. They could be borderline vague to a drafter, but very clear to the designer. And and it may look on paper side by side when you put a role-playing card that it looks generic, but you're seeing all the attributes of the card because I'm looking at various points of intersection. I'm looking at types or super type, subtype, activated abilities, stats, mana curve, etc. as points of intersection, whereas a generically powerful card such as, we'll say, Doomblade, just required you, it required you to have an affiliated cost of it must not be black, but it can fit into a lot of decks in such a way. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
No, I agree with you. My follow-up question with that is getting you to think about the context of this card, though, right? Where we're considering things as glue cards because we're considering how multifaceted it is and how many different decks that it can fit into, different aspects of the card, what kind of card type it is, what kind of subtype is it, so on and so forth. However, my question for you is, how often are you considering the relevancy between all of those factors, and when does it become a matter of equivalency? Because there's times where the things that makes a card good, right, isn't necessarily what makes it a good glue card, much like the counterspell compared to Imperious Prefect, right? Where you start getting into this scaling where it start to being a little bit more specialized in its role, and you start to ask, well, how important are those secondary features? The reason I brought up Imperious Prefect is because not only is it an elf card, it's also a warrior card. And in the context of the Fey Cube, that matters, right? But in the context of someone else's lower power environment, the fact that they're warriors or elves may not particularly matter outside of the fact that she buffs elves. So the card that you specifically highlighted was Volatile Wanderglyph. It is 1 in a red for a 2/2, and whenever it becomes tapped, you may discard a card, and if you do, draw a card. So it is very much filling that common role of it is deck filler, it is trying to add additional redundancy pieces into various archetypes. It's very much intended to be I need things to fill this slot in order to make my deck's engine turn.
Well,
right?
Meg, I'm going to, just for context, this is what Anthony told me, because this is important as far as what you're saying. Anthony said to me specifically that he put in this card as part of an aggro package. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. So, I had the same kind of reaction, right? Well, okay, it's a 2/2 for 2, which is not great. It doesn't have haste. It doesn't have any kind of additional combat damage or utility ability outside of the rummage. And I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of rummage. I think it can be good, but it's not something that I'm thinking I want to be aggressive, so rummaging is an ability that I'm going to prioritize. To me, it just seemed like an odd train of thought. Something like this in as an aggro.
Let me lay the landscape down. Let's do this instead. So for the listeners, about 4 months ago, give or takes, maybe a little bit longer than that, it was brought to my attention that mechanical decks and machine decks in the cube were very dominant and could be slightly unchallenged. And through the advisement of our group, they said you need to have some curvature that would allow for some aggressive stances to challenge those decks. But otherwise, everybody's building their own solitaire machines to a degree. And going back to this card, it's not that it's aggressive. It's that I was looking at... it's not spreadsheet aesthetics, but I am a firm believer that you need to have a certain amount of diversity in your mana values in your cube for disbursement throughout the draft. What I mean, a certain volume of 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s. Even though it looks like you're building a deck on paper on the spreadsheet aesthetics of it looks like a 360 card deck, as if I were building that, right? Theoretically. And I look at kind of placements and quantities of how many 2-drops do I have in red, how many 2-drops do I... And I do this for most cubes while I'm designing them, even though they're going to get, parsed out between 8 different players, right? And I needed some artifacts that were in red, that were, I guess, in the creature type, that could challenge in an early game a player. So I'm not looking at late game stats on this particular card. I'm looking at early game. So
let's define challenge. Are you talking about challenge from a draft perspective?
If you dropped it on curve, initially my thought was, and that's kind of what we're going to build up to. When I first put this card in, I was like, all right, well, I know this card on its own is not good. Rummaging's not great. 2/2 stats aren't great. But let's pretend that I dropped it on turn 2. And the most that I'll get is 1 activation. I'll attack with it. So that was my first thought, just base stats. Maybe just getting a red creature on the board that could challenge other decks that are hitting by 3, 4, 5. That's it. That's all I was looking at. And I needed something that I wanted it to be, I guess, deliberately or intentionally vulnerable to the artifact synergies. I didn't want, at the time, a creature that wasn't an artifact to go in the cube. I wanted things to die to disenchant. More of that, less of Doomblade, more disenchant. So there could be more dispersion of that. And when I'm thinking about the additional cards, that even though this card on its rate isn't very good, it still plays into, say, the Karnstruck strategy, where you got X amount of artifacts or whatever, right? And there's a lot of things that are looking at that. So that was one point of intersection, is it hits your artifact quantity. It also, when it attacks, if you turn it sideways, besides getting the 2/2, you get to put something in your graveyard. So I'm looking at all these lines and these thoughts. So I'm thinking, as a curator, okay, cool, that might feed like a Goblin Welder deck. That might feed a Felden deck. Maybe, right? It might feed a Vehicles deck. If I put that in Scooter, I can get some really cool, like, double down activations. One, I'd go ahead and stack them so that I draw a discard.
So, if I can interject real quick. I think it's important that when we're talking about a card like this, is that we talk about kind of the anatomy and how you got to that train of thought of it ending up in the aggro package, which, you know, Stu and I's visceral reaction of a gut laughter at that as a concept, right? However, there is a reality that is there, right? Of there will be a point in which you just need a certain density of something to play on turn 2, right? And even though it's not the best choice for aggro, it can accidentally end up in there. But that's not something they actively look for, which was kind of the point that I was making earlier. So the reason that I'm wanting to interject is that I feel like that it's important that we talk about identifying the anatomy of our cards and identifying how relevant that anatomy becomes. So, for example, you mentioned that it being an artifact creature is a boon because there's a lot of things that care about you having a certain density of artifacts in your deck, right?
Correct.
But it's also a bane because there's a large amount of disenchants, which, to be clear, nobody's going to waste their disenchant on your
exactly. That was a secondary piece of logic.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's not going to be killed because it's so low on the pecking order. That thought crossed my mind too.
But we start moving down through its functions, right? So one point of interaction is the fact that it's an artifact creature, right? Second point of interaction is the fact that it becomes tapped, which means that I understand that your line of reasoning was, oh, well, it can also become tapped from attacking. But a majority of people are going to read that and think vehicles. They're going to think, how am I going to be able to tap this with other things to get the value without needing to attack? I want to be able to tap this during my opponent's turn and leave it up as a blocker. Like, let me have that, let me have it there so that I can block it, tap it, and then get a rummage off of it before sending it away, right? There are ways that people, as drafters, are going to look at this and try to think about their relevant lines. But when you are looking at the next aspect of it, of that it is a 2/2, it is just a bear, right? A bear in 2025 era of Magic, no matter how we want to put up our cubes as the untouchable whatnots to power creep, there is a certain amount of new toy syndrome. And there is a certain amount of reality that we have to have, is that of each new toy that we add makes the generic bear feel a lot worse, right? And it's not to say that, again, that it being just a generic 2/2 bear is the worst thing to end up in an aggro deck, but it is more of a compromise and less of a desirable trait.
Aggro is not the best qualifier. Let's step that back. I only put it in because I was decreasing the curve for things that can get early attacks. I really wouldn't ever call this. I mean, I would never die on the hill saying this is an aggro card. If you're playing this as an aggro card, an aggressive card, things have went south in your draft.
Yeah.
I'm going to count the breakdown. So Volatile Wonderglyph is what we're referring to. All the points that I originally saw. 1, artifact count. 2, sure, low on the mana curve. So that's 2 points of interaction. 3, I looked at vehicle interaction. 4, I looked at the fact that it's a golem. So now it could become not a bear. It could become a 3/3 first strike. It could get counters. It could get regenerate. It could get flying because golems is a thing, even though we're going into a weird color for it. So I thought about all this. 5, I looked at setting up some form of the reanimation type factor, right? Like we talked about. So I'm looking at these 5 points, and then 6, exactly what you said. That's funny you mentioned it. No one's going to want to kill this outside of blocking through combat. No one's going to waste a spell on it. So these were my 6 points of reference when initially putting this card in my cube. That was the thought process. Mana curve, vulnerability, etc. Now, after about 4 drafts, I observed it just kind of always flicking. It was always turned up for whatever reason, and I'd walk around. I saw it at SCG Con, I believe, Charlotte. I saw it at a recent draft we had in town, and it's in sideboards. No one's interested in even kind of trying to see those 5-6 points of interaction because on rate, they see a 2/2 bear. This card sucks, right?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of made the point yourself. You've put a card in your cube that sucks so bad that no one would even want to waste any removal on it.
Which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, think about what it is, right? I mean, is that a bad thing? Like,
yes.
Well, that's where it gets weird. So I do. After watching it, I had a thought, and I wanted everybody to kind of see those role players. So I wanted them to see that headspace, that deliberation that went into initially putting this card in. I thought it'd be neat with like a Whip of Erebos deck. I thought it'd be a Goblin Welder deck. I thought Blade Spicer might like it, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, but here's the difference, though, right? All of those 3 cards that you mentioned are good cards that people actually want to draft, right? Versus this initial card is just kind of a 2/2 bear that might end up in that deck. So
Yes.
The reason that I pointed out the anatomy is to kind of get you to think about like, oh, these are the things that I was thinking about and where they're relevant. So let me make this as an example so that way we can kind of give you some perspective, right? Let's say that I have a 0 mana instant card, right? It doesn't do anything. It literally does nothing. You play it, it does nothing. Me saying, well, it's a good card because it increases storm count, doesn't make it a good card, right? It just means that it's a card that somebody's going to begrudgingly try to throw into their stuff in order to do something stupid with.
Darksteel Relic,
right?
0 mana, indestructible.
Yeah.
It does nothing.
Yeah,
but
it's a great. That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
The point is that nobody's going to want to pick up the Darksteel Relic unless they're trying to like actively look for a density of doing something stupid. And even in that point, it's like that's a card they settle with, right? So each of these attributes of the cards that we are considering here, each of these things, we should like actually sit down and identify, is this relevant enough for people to draft it? It being an artifact bear doesn't particularly matter in your environment, right?
Correct,
Because
correct.
you have good cards you'd rather have in your deck.
That's
why it keeps ending up in sideboards.
Well, yeah, and so I gave it the time. I saw what happened, and it played exactly. Had no evasion. Rummaging didn't seem very appealing. No one was seeing these extra pieces, nor the slot equity wasn't really used. It just really boiled down to that. So we kind of now taken that card, and now we're making a decision, right? So the next part of my process now was to figure out, all right, I'm going to now replace this card. This card did not do all the things that, at least internally for me, it promised would happen. So let's talk about I went through my binders and I laid out some cards. I'm like, all right, I'm going to look for red. And initially, I wanted to find an artifact card, and I wanted to find one that was a 2-drop spot, and I wanted to lock in on that. The first card, when I'm going through my binders, I laid out approximately 6 cards. I had these in my binders, and at one point, they may or may not have been in the cube, and I'm like, does this actually fit? So what I wanted to do as a process, and this has already been solved, by the way. I've already worked this entire thing. I even talked to Stu yesterday about it, and I'll tell you where I landed when we're done. But the first initial process that I went through, May, was, all right, I think maybe I want to stay with a 2-drop because my 2-drop density in my cube was a little lower than I cared for it to be. My 3 mana value artifact interaction of some point in red was a little bit tilted and a little bit higher.
And I want to ask this just before we get into the options. when you were originally looking for this replacement and settled on the Wanderglyph, was that just the process of, I'm going to go to Scryfall, I'm going to look for 2 mana value creatures,
Yeah, it was about
only in red?
Yes.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I really just wanted to kind of fill out my 2-drop slot.
Okay.
And they're pretty limited, actually. If you go through Scryfall, and I wanted it to be a creature because I wanted more of an aggressive package, and this was one of the ones that I landed on in that package at the time. Yes, it was about that simple. And then the additional things, interact with golems, could maybe do a thing with Reanimator, maybe could get inside of a vehicle. Those were all side effects of that choice. But initially, I wanted a 2-mana value creature to bolster up that slot. And the options are quite limited. So in the binder, didn't want to spend any money, tired of paying for shipping fees, not going to lie to you, don't care who you buy from, but in this case, I was purchasing my cards from Card Kingdom, and it's hitting me for about $8 every time I order a route of cards from Card Kingdom. I'm like, I'm just going to see what I got. So here are the cards, and I'll read them out to you that came out of my binder. Dockside Extortionist, Scrap Welder, Slowbad Iron Goblin, Mizium Tank, Feedback Bolt, and Pia Nalar. So I'm going to kind of work this process, and we'll work this as a group, but I kind of worked it out, and I have notes. And you found some more, too, actually. I think Stu found some that I probably should add. I see at least 2 now, actually.
I just did the same search you did. So I looked at 2 mana value, in red only, artifact and creature, advanced search on Scryfall. The first one, actually, I think is very, very interesting because I think it can play, well, it certainly does play in that aggressive. So you want me to go ahead and call this one out?
Go ahead, and I'll tell you why I would never add this one.
Okay, so this is Assaultron Dominator, 1 and a red for an artifact creature robot. It's a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. Whenever an artifact creature you control attacks, you may pay 1 energy. If you do, put your choice of a +1/+1, first strike, or trample counter on that creature.
Well, this is an easy one for me. I don't support energy anymore. I used to. And I don't want to start sending that signpost. 2, I really don't want to do counters that are of a ability. I want to avoid that. I don't want those marbles all over the table. I may have some in the cube, but I really don't want them to be there. I don't want a creature gains first strike. I don't want these things. I don't want trample counters. I don't want these additional pieces. I want the cards to basically, the best I can, read to the player exactly what it does on the face of the card without additional pieces. That's it. I don't want to deal with that. So that one's out. In my binder, this was an interesting one, May. Dockside Extortionist. This is the one that got banned out of Commander. And I was staring at this card, and I was kind of working the process. And so for people who aren't familiar with Dockside Extortionist...
There's nothing fair that can exist within your environment. Putting this in an environment where a majority of decks include artifacts is basically saying, hey, this creature's a free ritual.
Yes.
Go nuts.
Yes. Or...
At best, it's a ritual. Or, sorry, at worst, it's a ritual. At best, it's, I now have a pile of treasures that I can now trigger my artifact garbage with.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So this card, initially I stared at it. So a lot of things could happen on those points of intersection we were talking about. 1, it was a ritual. You're correct. 2, it's hyper dependent on where you stand with the artifact count of your opponent. 3, red wants to kind of, by its idea, destroy artifacts. So you are at this weird dichotomy or this intersection where this creature is existing based on their account of their artifacts and their enchantments, yet the deck that normally would want this to be in there would be blowing them up. That would create a weird, unusual tension. 2, it's a come out of nowhere. Maybe your opponent is doing a great job and you're just punishing them for playing your cube and getting ahead. And then suddenly out of nowhere, you're dropping a triplicate Titan, punishing them. And it's a weird way for basically building a good deck. And that was the problem with this card in Commander, I think, a lot of times. Plus, 3 or 4 or wherever I'm at on this count, probably 5, it's not multiplayer anymore. It's 1v1, so this number's going to be a lot less. The reason why this card was so egregious in Commander is because it came out of nowhere and just you dropped it and you just counted the other 3 players' stuff. And you're always going to get a lot of hits. So it wasn't even a ritual. It just wasn't even fun. And then you throw in some blink in there and you're just breaking the game at this point, getting so much leading edge, so much advantage. And then another point, like you said, it hits my artifact count. and it hits the sack and the treasures, punish them for whatever the aristocrats version of artifacts do. It would do a lot of things. But it's so swingy. It could be feast. It could be famine. It's all over the place. I just put an X on it. That was my logic.
So the thing that I will add is that it is important that we're not just swapping quote-unquote fair cards for unfair cards, right?
Yep.
Just throwing in, going the complete opposite direction of, we're going to take a card that was never played into
I'll show
a card
them.
that will all be played, right? Make sure we're not just swinging that pendulum back and forth. We want to get to a point where it's like regulated again. So if you'll humor me for a second, there was actually 3 suggestions that I had in mind when I was like thinking about this. And it has to do with kind of the axes that you were trying to address. Because, as you said, there is a diminished amount of 2-drops in your cube, right? So, the first one I wanted to recommend was Tawashi's Song Shaper. It is a 1 and a red artifact human artificer. It's a 2/2. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. This is a case where, hey, this is a bear, but at least it gets bigger, right? There's at least some kind of a payoff for this. Even if it doesn't have a lot more of that overlaps with golems and whatnot, it is still an aggressive creature so long as you're playing, a card every turn. Because you're still getting like a 3/2 for 2. And that's a good rate.
I like that card.
I do too.
It came up on the list as well. I also saw this one that I like because it has... For me, this is nice, certainly from an aggressive perspective, but it also has other synergies locked in. This is Red Herring, 1 and a red for an artifact creature, Clue Fish. It's a 2/2 with haste. It attacks each combat if able, and you can pay 2, sack it, and draw a card, like, a clue.
I actually did look at this
I'm
card.
not going to lie to you. I thought Red Herring was already in the cube.
It should
And the
be.
fact that it's not is frankly a shame. I love Red Herring.
Yeah, I actually put it in the Monopoly. I ordered 2 copies of it. It's in my binder as well. I did order this when it came out. When I was building this package of this aggro package, what I don't like is the attacks each combat if able on most cards. I don't like it when a card takes away your ability to make that decision. I've just never been a fan of those cards.
More of an aggressive card, right?
It's so the aggro package, to kind of rewind this back, has proven at this point that one card getting cut at this point, the Wonderglyph, isn't going to make a difference. I mean, we recently talked about in the Felden episode, you can rewind back and you can hit pause and keep playing it over and over again as a riff track. You'll hear Stu going, Felden died.
What's particularly nice about these 2 examples is that with my example, it's leaning into that kind of wanting something to be able to like lean into like artifact synergies while being an artifact card, right?
Yes.
And with Stu's example, where it's just like, hey, this is just like a card that you can sacrifice, draw a card, it turns sideways. It's pretty good. It's pretty good at what it does. Even though it doesn't feel good to have the has to attack every turn, when you're trying to look for that slot, it makes sense.
If I'm drafting an aggressive deck, if I'm just trying to turn creatures sideways, that requirement that I have to attack each combat really isn't a big deal
not a
to
real
me.
requirement.
I'm not looking at that as enough of a downside to not get my 2 damage in.
I do like that card. I probably will add it. You guys are creating a whole new episode of cuts because Wonderglyph was an easy cut. Cutting another card for Red Herring, that's kind of where I landed. Let's kind of...
Guess what? I have another recommendation.
Yeah, of course you do.
So, of course I do. So, another approach that I wanted to have you consider is that maybe instead of just having another artifact for the slot, because we already have like a lot of artifacts in this cube, maybe filling the role that you were trying to fill with this card for something that's a little bit better at filling it. So the thing I wanted to recommend was Reckless Detective. It is 1 and a red for a 0/3 Devil Detective. And whenever it attacks, you may sacrifice an artifact or discard a card. If you do, draw a card. And it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. This card is scary. It's a scary card, and it overlaps the roles that you were trying to fill with your... I already forgot its name. That's how forgettable this bear
The Wonderglyph. It's a Wonderwall.
But my point is that this leans into
volatile,
that
it's
kind of
volatile.
aggressive synergy. It can lean into sacrifice synergies. It can lead into that kind of looting stuff that you were trying to fill the space for, where it's just like, hey, I'm trying to fill my graveyard. This can fill a lot of those roles, even if it's not directly an artifact. It does directly interact with artifacts, right?
Yes. The reason why I've tilted more towards less... I wanted to have less creatures that couldn't be interacted with where Disenchant didn't just cut to pieces the air quotes artifact cube, but everybody's playing a piece of the artifact cube. I didn't want it so the green player can just, because the strategy in the past is I'm just not, they did that, it's been mentioned before, kind of like, what was this done? Was this done during, I guess, Dominaria and all these other sets where they go, I'm just not going to play into the bit, the artifact stuff, and then I'm going to deactivate all of your disenchants and whatnot. The reason why I'm tilting towards, and I wanted to have a creature that was vulnerable to a disenchant, even though you wouldn't want to use your disenchant on it theoretically, but you would if you must, is I wanted more artifact lean in those colors. And because we've gotten that technology lately from Wizards of the Coast, they're not all brown anymore, right? They're not all colorless. We've gotten more options where I can create these points of vulnerability and interaction, right? And to kind of proceed down the list, Scrap Welder fell into the Felden trap that we talked about on a recent episode, where it's neat, but it required very specific, I guess, interaction points, had to be less than the thing that you sacrificed. So I just kind of scrapped that one, literally let Welder go. Then I looked at Slowbad. Slowbad, the Iron Goblin, was kind of interesting for just a moment, and it was a Phyrexian Goblin Artificer that you could tap, sacrifice an artifact, add an amount of red equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Spend this only to cast artifact spells or activate artifact abilities. So it immediately became so specialized, as you talked about. You mentioned that earlier in the episode, that it kind of just pushed itself out again. At one point, I think I put this in for about 30 minutes at one point and took it out of the cube. Almost did it again because it's just only wants to play in one deck. And it's so specific about what it wants to do that it'll just become a 3/3 for 3 most of the time. Would you agree with that? It's so conditional.
Maybe, yeah.
It's interesting.
I mean, this is obviously the ability is not something that's new necessarily even to the cube, right? There's other ways to sacrifice artifacts. I think I would actually. Would I prefer that over Scrap World? Yeah, maybe I would, because obviously ramping is nice, and being able to get out. Let's say like a mirror, right? So you've got a mirror out on turn 2, you play this on turn 3, and then you can tap your mirror for a mana, and then you can sack it through Slowbad, and then maybe you've got access to like 6 or 7 mana by the time, turn 4 comes around. Like that's a pretty big deal.
It's pretty neat, but it's a lot of maybes and requires a lot of setup.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what it. So the next one I had on the list, and this was in the cube iteration. Mizium Tank was in there for a few minutes.
Let me stop you. The reason why I actually think that is more worth the squeeze is because you get the red mana.
Sure. What do you do with it? You can only use it for artifacts or their abilities.
You can.
The most of the cube is artifacts.
Most of the cube is artifacts.
Not if we're blowing them up with disenchants, people.
So let's see. What can we do?
You can do a lot of things with it.
We could play a Combustible Gearhulk.
Sure.
We could play a Ruin Grinder.
Sure. Keep going. You're not going to play a Goldspan. You can play Twin. I get it. You could do things.
I could play a
you can activate. No, it's not an artifact. Can't do that at all.
Well, I can sacrifice an artifact. So I can pay 3 and sack it.
Okay, so I want to point this out. This actually leads me down part of my thought process too. Stu's pointing out a good point. I didn't want to put too many cards in there that I've seen in the past. This was a long time ago. We were at another SCG con. And I remember I walked up to the table and people are playing my artifact cube. And I just kind of walked up because I was running another cube. And this one person goes, I'm going infinite. And he's doing something that's definitely not infinite. And the other person's accepting the fact that this infinite interaction that's not real is occurring. They've already misread this interaction that they're doing. Some kind of KCI combo they're doing, but it's not correct and they're not playing it correct. But they're both having fun. And I'm thinking, you know what? One's doing it. The other one's proud they're doing it. The other one's over there just literally saying, okay, cool. I get it. Yeah, I'm losing. And neither, this is not really happening. But I'm thinking, oh man, they have misread these cards. They're misplaying these cards. I really don't want to, They both seem happy with what's happening. They seem to be okay with it. They're two friends, and they're kind of laughing, and they're not really playing this correctly, but I don't want to come over and bum them out. They're having a good time, and it's not my place to interact in their game. Just going to let it be. I probably should have said that's not how this works, this interaction they're doing, but it is what it is. So when I look at the card Slowbad, and I go back to that, Stu just pointed out about 3 cards he got right and 2 he got wrong going through the list. And he's snapshotting it. I know he's doing it on the fly, and he's not staring at the card in his hand, which this wouldn't happen in a real game. He'd pay a lot more attention. But that opportunity of adding red mana with a card like that and then just casting a red spell is real. A player will do that. You know they will. They'll just glance over that. Supposed to be only for artifacts, only used to cast artifacts or activated abilities of artifacts. You know someone is going to float that mana and start bolting and doing all these weird things. It's going to occur. And I want to avoid cards that create that opportunity for the mistakes.
It is interesting, actually. Let's say we take that 6 mana as kind of a benchmark. At 6 mana, you have Scavenged Brawler, Scuttling Doom Engine, Triskelion, and Worm Coil Engine.
Sure.
Right? For just one more, you've got a Meteor Golem and maybe a Mirror Battlesphere. Those are all colorless.
What did you sack, though, to get all that mana? Did you sack something that large? Because you had to have sacked something that large to get that much mana.
Let's say you play this on turn 3.
Sure.
All right. So on my turn 2, turn 1, whatever, I just play a land. Doesn't matter. Turn 2, I play a mirror. Right. So now I have 2 lands. Turn 3, I play this. Maybe I've got the 2 lands and the mirror. Maybe I've got 3 lands. Let's just say, for argument's sake, I've got 3 lands and my mirror, and I play this. Turn 4, I have 4 lands. That's 4 mana. I tap the mirror. That's 5 mana. And then I sack it to slow bad.
Yeah, I see what you're
7
doing.
mana. So, even if I've missed a land drop, I've got 6 red mana. And actually, going back, the red mana's okay because you can use it to tap for like Combustible Gearhulk or a Ruin Grinder. But the colorless options are far superior.
I stared at this card for a long time. It's very
But is that all enough?
Yeah, it's not enough. It's not. At this point...
Do you want to know why I think it's not enough?
I can interject.
Yeah, of course.
For our long conversation about like the potential of slow bad and whatnot. There's actually a common thread between Scrap Welder, Slow Bad, and Mizium Tank. The common thread is that each of these slowly start to become more specialized. Each of these start requiring more pieces. And part of the whole issue that you needed to put in this generic 2/2 Wander Glyph was the fact that you were needing more things that are generically playable. That you were needing more things that can fill out slots. So it kind of seems, and this is just my perspective, hearing about these conversations that I was not previously a part of, me recognizing you're switching out something that was supposed to be a generic thing that didn't end up working out because the thing that it was generically, good at, it was bad at.
Yep.
And switching out that generic thing for now things that require extra pieces, things that require extra setup, things that require additional things. There's an innate complexity that you are sidestepping when you are replacing the Wander Glyph for any of these.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Which leads us down this next card. This is another one too. I want to read this card, and I want to talk about this card because there's something to be learned here for cube curators. This one, the other ones, we can say Dockside Extortionist was a threat to the environment potentially. We all agree with that.
Sure.
It had potential threats. It could have been Feast or Famine. It could have been Out of This World, or it could have done nothing. It was all over the place. But that card could be a threat to the environment, say, for example, like a Skull Clamp to this environment in a different way, right? Would you agree with that statement?
I wouldn't put Dockside in this.
I'm not putting it in for this because it could create game states that are not fun. It could be like, wow, I recovered, or it could be I won because I just won more than I was supposed to, or it could be my deck is terrible and your deck is really great, May, and then I play Dockside Extortionist, capitalize off of your great game state, and suddenly I'm in the game. Some people might call that stabilization, but EDH Commander has proven that that card sometimes has linked to it this is kind of bullshit. I did all this work, and you just played a 2-drop that just got you back. You didn't earn it. That's the problem with this card, okay? We're going to move past that.
Okay.
Feedback Bolt is a card. I think this might have been in there about 4 or 5 years ago and took it out immediately. This card is a card that I want to focus in on for a lot of curators to listen to. Feedback Bolt for 4 colorless and 1 red instant. Feedback Bolt deals damage to target player equal to the number of artifacts you control. This card has the potential to win out of nowhere, to maybe create some salt. It may be win more. It may be there's a lot of that opportunity cost here. It may be just penalizing someone for playing the cube. As in, you sat down to play my cube with me. You've built a really great game state over here, May. You've done the great job. I play Dockside Extortionist because you've done a great job, and then I play Feedback Bolt. You lose. I didn't do anything except for play just very nominal amount of expertise. I didn't do anything, in my opinion. Feedback Bolt is not a card, in my opinion, that deserves the game win. I did notice while reading this, it says to the number of artifacts you control. Originally, when I first read this card, explains the card kind of thing. I thought it was the opponent's, which would have made it more egregious to me. Like, I'm just going to punish you for playing the game. But in this case, all I've done is win more at this point. I've built up all my artifacts, played all my mirrors, Feedback Bolt, and you're like, okay, I lose. I don't like that type of magic. I don't think that's some people, and I want the listener's opinion, I think there's an opportunity for that not to be a deserved win. That's not like paying an X-Spell, sinking it in. Yes, they can counter it, and they can do all these things, but it's an instant speed, end of turn, out of nowhere win. Do you agree with that?
No.
I'm not a big fan of this card.
I don't know. I never saw this card in action, and I would question if this was put in the cube, and obviously you've put it in because it synergizes with artifacts very well. What did this see play? And if it did, what kind of damage are you expecting to get out of 5 mana? It's instant speed, which is really nice, but I almost feel like you're applying the logic backwards, right? Because you said that Dockside Extortionist can be a bit of a feel bad kind of thing because you are gaining an advantage for your opponent playing and putting together a good deck, but Feedback Bolt is kind of rewarding yourself for playing a good deck and putting a large density of artifacts out there. Right, so I don't know. For me, I don't feel like I see a huge problem with this card if I've built up a critical number of artifacts, which, let's be honest, it's not easy to just chuck out and have like 10 artifacts out in the artifact cube, right? It's not that easy.
It's not that easy. There's no,
so I feel
you're not cheating them in.
What's an amount of damage? If you could put, May, I'll ask you this: what's an amount of damage that you would receive from a card like Feedback Bolt?
That'd make you mad.
Be like, man, I don't
want to play this card no more. I don't want to play your cube.
You spent 5 mana on it. At that point, if you spent 5 mana on it and have an entire board of artifacts enough to kill me, you earned it at that point.
Absolutely.
Right? I don't think that there's an amount of damage that you could deal in which that I would feel bad for losing.
No.
I would feel more bad about the experiences of, yes, I have this 5-costed card stuck in my hand and I just don't have enough artifacts on board to actually get lethal at any point. And now I have to spend an entire turn hoping that maybe that this will be enough damage. Like, this is a card that requires a lot of setup. It requires a lot of mana, like, relatively speaking. Like, other people are, like, establishing the boards, or even for, like, the control decks, like, for counterspell or whatnot. There is a certain degree of risk that comes with this amount of setup into the, I got you for so-and-so damage because I played a bunch of little cheap artifacts that don't do a lot. What happens if that's not lethal?
Yeah, and
right?
so
that's what feels bad.
Full disclosure, when
Me
I took
being
this,
killed by that, I'm like, okay, no, great, you got it.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't until this moment where we read this out loud. I'm telling you, when I laid these out in my binder in my poorly lit office without my reading glasses on, and I had these 6 cards laid out, and we're going to talk about the one I chose in a moment, I thought it said the other player. I really did believe that. And that card, that's what really, now looking back at it in retrospect.
So now you've read the card.
Now I've read the card and it's more interesting. I just don't, May made a good point. This card literally, it requires you to have a game state, get all set up. You should probably be winning already. It's a finisher.
I disagree. And I think that the cube is technical enough. I think you cannot look at every card through the lens of, I just need this card to be good in isolation. Because I think for a card to have such a dramatic effect like it does, yes, it might require a fair amount of setup, but and it's instant speed. I feel like because it has that instant speed ability, I feel like it can be good against control decks where otherwise spending 5 mana against a control deck at sorcery speed can be kind of a death sentence. And I feel like, again, the fact that it's the number of artifacts you control rather than your opponent, again is going to reward you for creating that critical density of artifacts.
Worst case scenario, this is a Lava X. That's where you'd kind of want that rate to be.
Lava X hits creatures, right?
Lava X is the one that isn't that the one that costs 5 mana and hits a player for 5?
Is it a player for 5? I don't know.
Well, that's kind of the floor here. And if this was an X spell, like a Rolling Thunder or something as a closer, if you were doing that, you're talking about the idea you'd pay 1 and then X would be 4. You'd only hit them for 4 and maybe you win. So that's kind of the floor of this. But I think May, even though I read this card incorrectly in my evaluation, May pointed out the fact that this could be just sitting in your hand and almost be frustrating that I couldn't
require 4 artifacts for it to be a Lava Axe.
Yes.
I want you to process that, digest that for a moment. Or was it 5?
It's 5.
Whatever.
It would be 5.
5. You have to have 5 artifacts on board in order to get a Lava Axe, right?
Yes, at instant speed. It's not... I'm going to lean in. This just isn't good and could be trappy for a lot of reasons. It could be win more, or it could be really frustrating to have in your hand. This is another feast or famine card. This would be almost Dockside Extortious in theory. Either you've got the artifacts, and this is
not even remotely close.
But it could be because Dockside Extortionist is matchup dependent.
Comes out at 2.
Yeah, but you're looking at one player,
and also doesn't require you to set up. It punishes your opponent for having cards.
In a table of 8, you'll get at least 2 players that won't even embrace the artifact cube. They hide behind that. I'm going to play that strategy of I'm not going to let you have disenchant on me. So it gets weird with Dockside Extortionist. Although you're right, you'll get 80-90% of accuracy on it, and you'll get your return on investment.
What in your head is like an amount of treasures that you need to get from Dockside in order for it to be considered egregious?
I want 1+. I want 1 more than the cost. I do, for me to even want to play that.
I would dare say I'm happy with 2.
I'm happy with 2.
Just
100%. 2 is fine.
2 is fine.
Any more than 2 is great.
As soon as it gets to 3, then you start getting into stupid territory, right?
Yeah. So Dockside's not going in the cube. Feedback Bolt's not. So this is where I landed. I want to take this back to where we started this conversation. I wanted to do an aggro pickup. I wanted to stay in 2 mana value. I wanted it to be artifact relevant. I want everybody to see these lines, these points of intersection that as we're evaluating these cards to replace a singular card that is known to be bad at this point that replaced a card that may have been good. I landed on Pia Nalar. I've forgotten that I didn't even have this card in my cube anymore. For 2 colorless and 1 red, you get a legendary creature, Human Artificer. When Pia Nalar enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 colorless Stopter artifact creature token with flying. Or you can pay 1 colorless and red, target artifact creature gets +1/+0 until the end of the turn. Or you can pay 1 generic, sacrifice an artifact, target creature can't block this turn. This card has so many points of intersection. The only downside, I'm going to give you 2 downsides to this as I'm evaluating this card. 1, it wasn't an artifact. 2, it was a 3-drop.
Makes an artifact.
Makes an artifact.
But I looked at the base rate. If I'm doing the super type, subtype Human Artificer was actually appealing too. That opens up an opportunity, even though I don't support humans, and I don't really support artificers anymore. I did find that there were cards that could support that, and there's a density of artificers in here by just proxy of it being an artifact cube. So that was a point of evaluation in this card. The fact that it makes a 1/1 colorless Stopter artifact creature token with flying was kind of what you said. It was the big one. It checks all those points in an artifact cube. Density, an aggressive, a potential flyer with evasion, the ability to, fire breathing, even though it's kind of highly costed for fire breathing, and the fact that you could sacrifice an artifact, target creature can't block this turn, fits an aggro strategy, but also hits the artifact sack strategy. It does a lot.
So
it does.
Yeah, no, this is definitely my favorite on the list. Just to be clear,
it's in
of the 6 that you've listed on here. This one's my favorite of the 6.
Yes.
I'd rather have slow.
I'm going to kind of bring us into a weird segue point. Where do you both know the card Loyal Apprentice?
No.
Sounds familiar.
Okay, so it is 1 and a red for 2/1. It's a Human Artificer with haste. At the beginning of combat every turn, if you control your commander, create a colorless Stopter with flying. And it gains haste until end of that turn.
Yes.
This card is great. It's fantastic. The only complaint is that you have to have a commander. Could you imagine if there was a loyal apprentice style card that like existed without needing your commander?
I
It
actually
would be perfect
had
for your
that
environment.
in my binder with these 6 red cards or 7 red cards. So that card was sitting there, and I looked at it, and I'm like, damn it, it says commander. I literally was thinking the same thing
Anything's
because
possible with a Sharpie and some
well,
some optimism.
I run the other version that I don't have pulled up. Can you look at there's a 3-drop in here that's in red that gives all your creature or artifacts haste and makes a Thopter. That is already in here and been here. So
But my point is that the reason that Pia is like the best of the bunch is because we don't have a loyal apprentice.
correct. But we have these points of intersection that this card does check. And I wanted to kind of run through that. So PNLR, and that's what I'm doing in my process. That's all this episode is really about, is that when you're making card selections in your cube, if you're trying to hit multiple points and you're trying to make that determination, is this a generically good card, or is this card open up a lot of lanes for a lot of avenues for different strategies and archetypes? So I stayed in red and brown for this conversation, and I was reflecting upon Stu's recent conversation when he's talking about the Ode to Feldon and how Feldon, he was a mono red deck. And if I were Stu, these cards would have probably had made it into that Feldon deck if I were building it. And Feldon's been cut since then. That's spoiler alert. That episode comes out or already came out. PNLR now has some friends. Aside from the fact now that because of some recent releases, we have some really strong Thopter strategies. We finally got a Thopter Lord that I really, the Thopter Lord that I didn't know I wanted, but I always wanted, and that was Stridehanger Automaton. For 3 colorless, you get an artifact creature construct. So checks a lane there going to my construct strategies, can be searched by my constructs. The second part of it is Thopters you control get +1/+1. So now my 1/1s are now 2/2s, flyers with evasion. So now we've got my aggro package just suddenly kind of got supported, even though I'm in the 3-drop group, by having evasion over the Wanderglyph. And if one or more artifact tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus an additional 1/1 color Thopter artifact creature token with flying are created instead. So now PNLR makes 2 Thopters. Now you're representing 4 damage with flying spread across 2. It's doing a lot here. Like, I like that. So that was all right. She's doing a thing now, and I've already got like the
hang on, 4 damage.
Is it 2/2/2s?
Wow, I don't know. I'm absolutely blown away. I've spent 3 mana and then another 3 mana to get 4 flying damage.
Well, I can't help you there.
So impressive.
Well, let's make it more spicy for
How
Stu.
incredible is that?
Stu the Cynic.
Yeah, but you can't be like, hey, look, I've got these 2 cards, and oh, look, if I just throw in Retrofit of Foundry, which is like a vintage
At least
staple.
one more than a Lava Axe.
Yeah, but Retrofit or Foundry, you made this point during your argument about your Feldon deck and the way back, will allow you to sack those to make the 4/4s.
My feedback bolt is starting to look real
Really
spicy right now.
All right, so I'm giving Stu one more thing for another 3-drop because I just picked these because I figured I'm trying to satisfy Stu. But Hedron Detonator is now in red also, and for 2 colorless and 1 red, you get a creature, Goblin, Artificer. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Hedron Detonator deals 1 damage to target opponent. Sacrifice 2 artifacts, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn for a 2/3. So now PNLR enters. Sees, I know we've paid 9 mana at this point. Just follow this path of options. And now we get 2/2/2 Thopters. Now we hit them for 2. I was just trying to evaluate all these different opportunities. Yeah, Feedback Bolt is looking really good now. But but now we've paid 15 mana to get to Feedback Bolt.
Yes, we have.
I realize this.
This is the conversation again. You're absolutely right. When we went back to that Feldon discussion, where is this time coming from? Like, how many time walks have I been able to draft to just goldfish this strategy when I've got my opponent in black playing a Scorpic Lord for 3 mana, which is a 3/2 menace, gives all my other artifacts menace, and he's just smacking me for 4 and 5 damage a turn.
I stayed exclusively in red for your benefit with these choices, but I could have went a lot of other colors. Could have done a lot more because PNLR is only 1 red and splashable. It does not have to go in this goofy red deck that I'm building right here in front of you in my thought chain. I just put them down for your benefit so you could see them.
Thank you.
But
I appreciate that.
But I wanted people to see that process of what would this look like and how would I debate with Stu whenever I presented PNLR. PNLR just on its own does a lot. Forget about all the side quest pieces that I provided you. Forget about feedback bolt. PNLR makes a 1/1 flyer. It can basically, she can bump that 1/1 flyer. She gives you the ability to sacrifice an artifact and give one of your aggressive strategies for its base rate unblockable. That's back to this is the top end of my aggro deck, originally trying to satisfy that idea.
When we're evaluating kind of our generic cards that are underperforming, it's important that we assess not only like why they're good because of the amount of rolls, but whether or not that the roles that they fill are actually impactful enough to be relevant for your environment, and whether or not it's worth switching to something that is more specialized, or if it's worth switching to something that's more, let's say, generically good that fulfills those roles.
Agreed.
Right?
It's doing a lot of things.
I think that's kind of the point of today's episode.
Yeah, PNLR is doing a lot, right? It's in that sort of pseudo slot, right? It's in that 2 to 3 mana. To me, it's not aggressive particularly. It's a 2/2 for 3, right? Yeah, okay, you get a Thopter. It's a flying creature, so maybe the evasion means you're getting 1 damage a turn. Not particularly quick. 2 mana to give an artifact creature +1/+0 is fine.
It's a mana sink. It's not great, but it is what it is.
And sacrifice an artifact. Target creature can't block this turn.
It's actually pretty strong.
It's not horrible, but I don't know. To me, the sum of the parts of getting a Thopter and the fire breathing and the sacrifice so a creature can't block, they're all just okay.
Yeah, it is a role player that's multifaceted. It's not overly specialized. It reads pretty cleanly. It's not. It's the way the text is laid out. It's clean. It's easy to understand. I don't see the opportunity, like when we talked about slow bad, for people to make mistakes in my mind, to misplay this card. It literally just says step 1, step 2, step 3. These are the things you can do. Here's your menu. And the menu's pretty clean. And then it pairs well with something like Marionette Apprentice, which is for 2, by the way, going over that Rakdos shell that really wants to dig into this sacrifice type stuff and has aggro-ish type qualities about itself. I wanted something that could kind of fill that void of, yes, it's not aggressive, it's super top end. Yes, I did sacrifice a mana value, but in my 2 slot, I'm going back to the red herrings and things like that. These cards are neat, but I don't feel like they do a lot to really increase the gameplay. And you've pointed out very cleanly that the counters deck is your mid-range aggro strategy, or it has become.
You're talking about the mono green or green X with all the counters.
Hardened scales has become an aggressive package.
Yes.
So creating more aggressive components, I think I kind of tipped the scales a little bit towards an aggressive package, even though we really only had one gameplay state that has kind of showed that. I don't want to tilt it so far that it becomes. I know I've got a lot of players in our play group that like to turn creature sideways. We know this. We've got about 3 to 4 out of 8 that really want to do that. And so I'm trying to check the box for them and the type of gameplay they like, because I designed these cubes for our circle. But at the same time, I like the machine decks. I like the ahas.
I know you do, and I think maybe this is also somewhat of a lesson in, yes, you want to include cards that are gluey. Yes, you want to include cards that are multi-support for different archetypes. But sometimes it's just about what else exists in the cube. And I'll like I said, I drafted that Green X Hardened Scales Counters deck, not maybe the last time or the time before, and I went absolutely ham sandwiches with it. It was extremely powerful. And then when I tried to draft the red deck that was doing the funky, machiney kind of stuff, I got ran over by that deck. And then I get ran over by Chrome Host Seed Shark and, the Cheaty McCheetahs and things that are just so powerful that the time to spend 2 mana to give a creature +1/+0 is just not relevant enough. Depending, and maybe you could say, okay, but you can pay 1 and sack an artifact. So maybe the fire breathing isn't.
It'd be a lot easier if you had Dockside Extortionist.
It would be. Wouldn't that be lovely?
I know it would.
and I want to finish them off with that
Just
bot.
letting you know that you can just use your dockside extortionist to go into the basically lava axe.
Yeah, you could do a lot of things. These were all options, but that's what the takeaway is for this episode is you as the designer, the curator, have a lot of options presented before you. Your design goals do ultimately make the choice, and you will make mistakes, and we'll add air quotes generically costed, generically not powerful glue cards like I did, trying to envision the lanes that a player might see with the Wanderglyph to take it back to the top of the episode that just didn't pan out. And PNLR, I think, is a much better play here. Let's go ahead and wrap it up. Let's go ahead and close this down. Let's shut the shop, lock the doors, pull down the steel gate. What do you think? And take us to the socials?
I'm taking us to the socials, although I will say, rip Sid.
Yeah, Sid and Ventures Goggles. That is a good point that we could have looked at the artificers. All right, let's go ahead and take it away to the socials, please, Stu.
No Golgari Great
Not
Troll.
today.
We're not even going to talk about
We'll save
GGT.
that for a part two. Let's do another episode.
All right, fine. All right, as always, want to start out with a big thanks to all of our Patreons, to Patrick, Jeff, Nick Lapointe, Chris Fitzgerald, Timber Dragon, Brian Christensen, Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Nick Lapointe, Preston, and Sam McKenna. Big thank you to all of you for the ongoing support. Really means a lot to us over here at UberCube. I don't know where I think Anthony's just basically saving it up to buy more t-shirts, because you seem to come with a nice snazzy new t-shirt every time that we're recording, and I'm sitting here with this 15-year-old free shirt from Google, but I like that. Very nice. If you want to get out on the discussion, facebook.com/groups/mtgcube. Anthony, what do we got? 1,400? 15,000?
1,200.
1,200. All right.
Got a couple of decimals.
It's a lot of
making it
people.
to a million.
It's a lot of people. Good community. Find us on the socials, ubercubemtgpodcast.bsky.social, as well as at ubercubemtgpod on X. Avoid that, though. You can reach us via email, ubercubemtgpodcast@gmail.com, patreon.com/ubercube. Again, huge thanks to all of our patrons. Come hang out on the Discord. And as always, we're looking for your support.
If you're interested in actually becoming a Patreon...
I was talking about...
well, I'm going to toss out the Patreon idea. The Patreon idea is what it does is allow us to have more expanse, more reach. We got newer equipment, so we got better audio quality. This may be the what you get in your Christmas basket, but I do, reach out to the Patreons, try my best to really communicate with them as the best I can, within my time schedule. Occasionally sweet treats get in the mail, stuff like that. No promises there, but it is worth the time. If you're really enjoying the show and you're really liking what we're doing, we joked about it. You can win that trip to the Gulag, kind of like NPR, right? We'll give you that, free express trip to the Gulag. But other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube, and that is... cutting cards is hard. Happy cubing.
Happy cubing. Slow bad.